Claire Bennett had once believed divorce was the kind of ending with a clear shape. In her imagination, it would arrive like a door slamming shut, hard, final, like a black line drawn across 15 years of shared life. Painful enough to leave her stunned, but at least no longer uncertain. She had imagined walking out of the lawyer's office with a stack of papers in her hand, getting into her car, crying for a long time beneath Portland's gray sky. And from that moment on, everything would begin to separate. His name from her accounts, his clothes from her closet, his voice from her mornings, his habits from her body, but nothing in real life separated that cleanly. On the first Monday morning after the court confirmed their divorce, Claire still woke up in the very house she and Matthew Bennett had bought with a mortgage too large and a faith too young. She opened her eyes in the living room that had been temporarily turned into her bedroom, staring at the white ceiling with a small crack near the light fixture Matthew had said he would fix 3 years ago, listening to the heater groan inside the walls, hearing water running in the bathroom at the end of the hall, then the kitchen cabinet opening softly. The sound was so familiar, her body recognized it before her mind did. Matthew was taking down a mug, not just any mug, her pale blue ceramic mug, the one with a tiny chip on the handle from the winter of their 7th year of marriage, when she had dropped it into the sink. He would set it to the left of the coffee maker, pour her coffee first, wait about 4 seconds, and then reach for his own mug. Claire lay still in the dim morning light, feeling her throat tighten over something too small to be called a tragedy, yet too persistent to be called normal. They had been divorced at 9 o'clock the morning before. On paper, their marriage had been dissolved, but at 7:12 the next morning, the house still went on doing things as if no one had told. She put on a gray sweater, clipped her hair back with a plastic barrette, and walked into the kitchen in thick socks. Outside the window, Portland was sunk in the kind of November rain that never truly poured but also never stopped, only laying a long, damp chill over the porch, the backyard, and the maple tree in front of the house. The kitchen was still lit by the yellow light over the island. On the table, the court notice lay beside the sugar jar, the edge of the paper slightly curled because Claire had unfolded and refolded it so many times the night before, as if reading it enough times might make the word, dissolved, stop sounding like an insult. Matthew stood beside the coffee maker, shoulders slightly hunched, brown hair showing more gray than she wanted to notice, white t-shirt, wrinkled, gray pajama pants, his face not yet shaved. He didn't turn as soon as she came in. He poured coffee into her blue mug, then into his black one, added exactly 1/3 of a spoonful of sugar to hers, and pushed it toward the chair where she usually sat. No more, no less. After 15 years, his hands knew what his mouth had forgotten to say. Claire looked at the coffee, then at his left hand. His wedding ring was still there, thin, plain, scratched along the lower edge from the years he had fixed faucets, built shelves, cut wire in the garage, done every repair that could be handled with tools while leaving everything that needed words to break. Matthew noticed her looking. He pulled his hand back so slowly that the slowness itself felt like a confession. "I forgot," he said, his voice rough from mourning. Claire sat down, but she didn't touch the mug. "No," she answered. "You didn't." Matthew looked at the paper from the court, then out the window. He didn't argue. His refusal to argue had always made her angry in a strange way, because it made her feel like a person trying to fight a wall. After all these years, Claire understood that silence was not always peace. Some people used silence like armor, clean, pitiable, leaving no fingerprints on anyone else, while trapping the person beside them inside their own unanswered question. "You still take less sugar now?" Matthew asked after a while, as if they could walk around the divorce notice with a sentence about coffee. Claire looked at him. "You don't need to remember things like that anymore." He lowered his eyes to his own mug. "I'm not trying to remember." The sentence cut into her with the full weight of its truth. He wasn't trying. She wasn't trying to remember that he checked the back door lock twice before bed, or that he hated sweet breakfasts, or that he always put his keys in the wooden tray by the door and then touched his jacket pocket one more time because he was afraid he had forgotten his wallet. The body of someone who has loved another person stores small pieces of data the way a house stores the scent of someone who used to live there. No willpower required, no permission needed, and that was exactly why a paper divorce seemed so weak against the weight of habit. Claire picked up the mug, its heat stinging her palms slightly. "I have to get to work early." Matthew looked at the bowl of oatmeal he had already placed on the table. "You haven't eaten. You don't need to remember that either." She pushed her chair back. The scrape of the chair legs against the wood floor sounded dry and sharp. Matthew stayed seated. As she walked down the hallway, she could feel him watching her, not in an obvious, pleading way, but with the gaze of a man who had not yet accepted that looking was no longer a right. Claire picked up her purse, put on her coat, and opened the front door. Cold rain hit her face. In the front yard, the leafless maple stood like an old witness. They had planted it in the second year of their marriage, when its roots were still wrapped in burlap, and Matthew had said with the confidence of a man who did not yet know where he would fail, "One day, our kid will climb this tree." The tree had grown. No child had ever climbed it. And that morning, as Claire stepped out to her car, she realized some promises did not die when people stopped speaking of them. They lived on as objects. Trees, empty rooms, and cups of coffee still made exactly right. 3 weeks earlier, they had sat in a lawyer's office and ended everything with a civility so polished it felt almost cruel. Marjorie Keene's office was in a low building in downtown Portland. Not luxurious, but clean, with a window overlooking a small parking lot, soft Oregon landscape prints on the walls, an oak conference table, and a glass pitcher of lemon water placed in the middle as if a little sourness in the water could make dividing a life taste less bitter. Marjorie was Claire's lawyer in her 50s, short silver hair, gray eyes, speaking slowly and wasting no emotion. Matthew sat across from her beside his lawyer, Peter Haynes, a man with a professional smile, a dark blue tie, and the kind of voice that made painful things sound like procedure. In front of them was a list of assets, obligations, sale terms for the house, payment deadlines, retirement accounts, cars, insurance, furniture, ordinary things that made Claire nauseous. A shared life could be torn apart in cold lines. 1 dining set, 2 reading chairs, 1 lawn mower, 3 savings accounts, 1 roof repair debt, 1 house not yet ready to sell. The house was the biggest problem. The real estate market was slow. The mortgage was still in both their names. The value of the house had dipped just enough that if they sold quickly, they would lose more than either of them could afford after realtor fees, taxes, repairs, and the remaining loan balance. Matthew couldn't afford to rent another place while still paying half the mortgage. And Claire, though she had a steady income as operations coordinator for a group of clinics, could not carry both a new apartment and her share of the house alone. Marjorie said in a practical voice that they might need a temporary period of cohabitation until the house could be listed and sold. Claire had prepared herself for 30 days, 6 weeks at most. But Matthew, who had been almost silent through the meeting, spoke first. 90 days makes more sense. Claire turned to him. 30 days? He didn't look at her right away. 30 days isn't enough to fix what has to be fixed before listing. The west gutter overflows. The back door sticks. The garage shelving still needs to be cleared. The roof inspection could take time. You've known about those things for months, Claire said. Yes, and now we need to do it right if we don't want to lose money. She hated the word we when it fell from his mouth. One small word, and the whole room seemed to shrink around the path. We're divorced, Matthew. He looked at her then, his brown eyes tired, deep, and evasive all at once. The house still belongs to both of us. Marjorie watched them like someone who had seen hundreds of couples drag emotion into asset division while pretending it was only math. We can put in a clear 90-day timeline and specific living conditions. Separate space, shared expenses, privacy, sale process. If there's an issue, either party can request an adjustment. Claire had wanted to object. She had wanted to say no. I cannot live with this man for another 90 days in the house that has held everything we never said. But then she looked at the numbers, the mortgage, the cost of rent, the rainy season outside the window, Matthew sitting silently with his hands clasped, his ring still on his finger, and exhaustion won. After months of negotiation, she no longer had the strength to fight over 30 days versus 90. She nodded. 90 days. But there are rules. That night, they stood in their own kitchen and made a list of rules, as if a spreadsheet could save them from being 2 people who had once slept in the same bed. Claire took out a blank sheet of paper. Matthew got a pen. The refrigerator shelves would be divided. Laundry schedule. No entering each other's rooms. No asking about personal schedules unless it affected the sale of the house. No eating together unless they needed to discuss house matters. No bringing up the past during practical conversation. No inviting anyone over without notice. Matthew wrote each line carefully, his handwriting neat, slanting slightly to the right, the same handwriting that had once written in his wedding vows. I promise to build a home with you, not just a house. Claire remembered that line as she watched him write, no entering each other's rooms. She made her voice clearer. Each room belongs to the person staying in it. You don't come into mine. I don't go into yours. And your old office. As she looked toward the end of the hall, the white door was shut. Matthew looked that way too, very quickly, then turned back. That's still my office. It's always locked. I have work papers in there. I'm not asking why. I'm saying don't use it to hide anything else that has to do with me. Matthew set the pen down for a beat. Claire, don't say my name in that voice. His mouth tightened. Fine, there's nothing in there you need to worry about. Later, that sentence would become one of the things she remembered most clearly, not because it was a complete lie, but because it was the kind of half-truth more dangerous than a lie. Nothing she needed to worry about. Maybe Matthew had truly believed that. He had always thought that if he kept pain in a locked room, the people outside it would be protected. He did not understand that locked rooms could make an entire house run out of air. In the early years, Matthew had been the place where Claire breathed most easily. She could not retell their marriage as if it had been a mistake from the start, because that would betray the younger woman who had once loved him with such clean faith. They met in an old bookstore in southeast Portland on a spring evening. During a community poetry reading neither of them had truly wanted to attend. Claire's friend had dragged her there because she had just ended a dull relationship with a man who only remembered dates if his phone reminded him. Matthew's friend had dragged him there because, according to him, Matthew spent too much of his life between engineering drawings and breweries. Claire was 31 then, working in a family clinic, used to remembering everything for everyone else. From patients' appointments to the days the fax machine tended to jam. Matthew was 29, a mechanical engineer, quiet but not cold, with the kind of slow smile that seemed to take a few seconds before he allowed joy to show. They stood beside the same shelf after the reading, both reaching for an old copy of the shipping news. Matthew pulled his hand back and said, "You take it. I'm pretending to be more well-read than I actually am." Claire laughed. He looked at her as if that laugh were the best surprise of the day. Afterward, he asked her for coffee, but while talking, he spilled sugar across the table and awkwardly wiped it up with napkins, his face flushing red. Claire had liked that clumsiness. It made him unlike men, who always knew how they were supposed to stand under a light. Matthew loved her through small details. He remembered that she hated cilantro, that she got headaches when the weather pressure changed, that she liked sitting in restaurant booths by the window but hated having her back to the door. He did not talk much about feelings, but his actions were steady. When she had the flu, he stood in the kitchen of her small apartment reading a chicken soup recipe from his phone, with the seriousness of someone assembling medical equipment. When she was afraid to drive over the Fremont Bridge in the rain, he didn't laugh. He took a route 10 minutes longer. When she said she wasn't sure whether she wanted children right away, he answered, "I'm not marrying you because you're going to be a mother. I'm marrying you because you're you." Later, that sentence would become both precious and painful, because one part of her clung to it through the years without children, while another part watched him slowly withdraw every time the subject appeared. But when they bought the house, they knew nothing yet. They were still young in the way people in their 30s can be young before life. Teaches them that love does not automatically become the ability to suffer together. Their house in the Portland suburbs was not perfect at first, but they loved it because it needed them. The back door stuck. The living room floor had a few scratches. The kitchen light needed replacing. The front yard had a bare patch where the previous owner had once planted a shrub that had died. They bought it in April, signing the mortgage with the fear and thrill of people signing themselves into a future too large. On moving day, Matthew carried Claire over the threshold, even though she told him not to because she was holding a box of glassware. He said the house needed to know they were a team. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the box. They ate pizza on the living room floor because the dining table hadn't been assembled yet. Matthew played music from his phone, the sound small and crackly. Claire rested her feet on a box of books and said, "We're insane." Matthew looked around the empty room, afternoon light falling through dusty windows, and said, "Yeah, kind of insane with a mortgage." A few weeks later, they painted the living room themselves. Claire chose a gray-blue because she said it made the room feel calm. Matthew spilled a tray of paint, leaving a streak across the drop cloth, then dabbed a dot of color on her nose with his finger. She chased him through the room like they were children. That evening, they sat against the newly painted wall before it had fully dried, eating tacos, talking about how someday the empty room at the end of the hall would be a nursery. Not if, when, they lived in the grammar of faith. At first, that room held unopened boxes. Then Claire began taping paint samples to the wall. Nothing too obvious, just a few small squares of cream, silvery blue, pale yellow. Matthew installed a low bookshelf, saying children should have books at hand level. Claire bought a wooden mobile at a weekend craft fair. Tiny birds hanging from delicate strings, turning gently when the air moved. She asked, "Is it strange to buy this early?" Matthew held it up in the sunlight, watching the little wooden birds turn slowly. "No, some things have to be believed in before they arrive." That sentence had made her so happy that years later, looking back, she wondered whether happiness always carried the seed of loss inside its most beautiful word. Then the years passed, and faith began to turn into appointments. Appointments turned into tests. Tests turned into results. Results turned into calls from the clinic, pills, injections, insurance bills, and advice no one needed from relatives and friends. Claire began to hate sentences like, "Just relax. You're still young. Don't think about it so much. Sometimes people adopt and then get pregnant naturally." People spoke as if her body were a stuck door that would open if she simply stopped being tense. In the beginning, Matthew went with her to every appointment. He carried her purse, took notes on what the doctor said, counted injection days, set alarms to remind her to take hormones. But after each failure, he became quieter. He didn't disappear completely, only moved back an inch, then another inch. Claire was too busy blaming herself to notice the distance growing. She remembered one night after their third failed attempt, sitting on the bathroom floor with her head against the tub, saying through tears, "I think my body is fighting against us." Matthew stood in the doorway, his face pale, one hand gripping the frame. He said, "Don't say that." She waited for him to say more, waited for him to sit beside her, waited for him to say it wasn't her fault, waited for him to say he was scared too. He only stood there, then said, "We should sleep. You have work tomorrow." That sentence could have been concern. It could have been escape. For years, Claire could not tell the difference, only knew it left her alone on the cold tile. They lost a pregnancy that had barely become one at 6 weeks. Dr. Hall spoke very softly, too softly, saying there were no longer signs of development. Claire remembered the ceiling of the ultrasound room, a small stain shaped like a leaf. She stared at that stain instead of the screen. Matthew gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Afterward, they sat in the car outside the hospital parking lot for almost 40 minutes. Rain ran down the windshield. Neither of them turned on the engine. Neither of them spoke. Claire thought that if he said one sentence, any sentence, she would fall apart. But he only stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes red but dry. She had understood that silence as proof he was disappointed in her. Maybe, in truth, he was being choked by pain so badly he didn't know how to breathe. But what is never spoken will be translated by the person hurting, most in the cruelest possible way. After that day, the nursery began to change shape. No one decided it. First, Claire put a box of winter clothes in there. Then Matthew added repair tools. Then the bookshelf gathered dust. The mobile was packed into a box. The walls were never painted. The room became storage. The same way their marriage became a storage room for everything no one dared to open. Matthew did not betray her with another woman. There were no strange midnight texts, no perfume on his shirt, no suspicious business trip. His betrayal was cleaner than that, harder to accuse. He betrayed her by being absent while still sitting in the room, by fixing the back door but not fixing the sentence that had broken her, by paying bills on time while leaving her to pay the emotional cost alone, by sleeping beside her without touching her for weeks, then saying, "I'm just tired," when she asked what was wrong. Tired became a country where he took refuge. Claire slowly stopped asking. She made herself easier to live with. No mention of children, no mention of treatment, no mention of feeling jealous when a coworker showed newborn photos, no mention of crying in the car before walking into his cousin's baby shower. If someone asked whether they planned to keep trying, Matthew would look at her first, as if giving her the power to answer, but that handing over was also a way of placing the burden on her. Claire would smile and say, "We're letting things happen naturally." Matthew would nod, place a hand on her lower back, and outsiders would think he was gentle. Only Claire knew the hand was not warm. It was a social gesture, like a period at the end of a story they had never truly told. When she said she wanted a divorce, Matthew did not collapse. That fixed her decision in place. It was February, raining harder than usual, and they were eating tomato soup with grilled bread. She remembered the red of the soup in the bowl, the sound of the spoon against ceramic, Matthew asking whether the dishwasher had been making a strange sound as if that were the most important thing in the room. She set down her spoon and said, "I can't keep doing this." He looked up. "Doing what?" The question almost made her laugh because how could he not know? But that was their tragedy. Maybe he truly didn't know in the way she needed him to know. She said this, two decent people trying not to bother each other in the same house. Me living beside you instead of with you. Everything important behind a locked door. Matthew looked at her for a long time. She saw his throat move. What do you want? He asked. And in the question there was a weariness that made her feel like someone asking more from a man who had already been emptied out. She said, I want a divorce. He did not stand up, did not take her hand, did not get angry, did not beg. He only looked down at his bowl of soup and nodded. If that's what you need. Claire had waited for him to fight even a little. She had waited for him to ask if there was any other way. Waited for him to say he didn't want to lose her. Waited for him to give her something clear enough to prove he was still there. His calm came down over the last flame like snow. She stood, carried her bowl to the sink, and cried under the running hot water without letting him see. But now, after signing the papers, after seeing the ring, after hearing the call in the garage, Claire began to understand that his calm might not have been letting go. It might have been another kind of failure, a more cowardly one. Matthew did not fight because he did not know how to fight with words. He agreed because he thought agreement was the only way not to make her hate him more. And then he chose another way to keep her. 90 days, the house, repairs, the realtor, small habits, unsigned bowls of soup. Matthew's control was not like that of loud men. He did not order, did not forbid, did not threaten. He created conditions. He delayed. He withheld the full truth. He let financial reality, objects and memory do the work he did not dare do with his mouth. And because he looked wounded, because he seemed kind, because he was not cruel in a way easy to recognize, it was harder for Claire to name it. But actions do not require malice to cause harm. A person can hold someone else with their sadness like a rope and call it hope. After the call to Dr. Hall, everything changed quietly before it exploded. Matthew became more careful, but his care only made Claire see more clearly that he had something to hide. He took his phone with him into the bathroom. He no longer left his laptop open on the dining table. He asked more about her work schedule, always packaged as house logistics. Will you be home early Thursday? The gutter guy might come. Are you home this weekend? I'm planning to clear the garage. Do you need the living room quiet tonight? I have a call. Every question was reasonable. Every question had a hook. Claire began to realize she still lived in a house where he knew more of her movements than she wanted him to. She also began noticing things she had previously ignored. An envelope from the old clinic tucked too deep. A garage drawer locked because he said it held sharp tools. A file box in the shared office labeled Taxes 2015, but heavier than taxes should be. The way Matthew stood too long in front of the locked office door, like someone guarding a body. She didn't ask right away, partly because she feared the answer, partly because she had learned over years that if she asked Matthew before he was ready, he would retreat into silence, and she would once again become the person beating her hands against a wall until she felt insane. The night she opened the envelope from Hall Reproductive Medicine, rain fell so steadily that the house felt placed inside a box of sound. She sat on the floor of the shared office, her back against the filing cabinet, her hands cold. Matthew's test results were not only medical information, they were a revision of history. Severe motility issue, low morphology, male factor infertility, words clinical enough to survive any emotion. Those words made her remember every time the doctor had said the problem could be complex. Every time Claire had only heard the part related to herself, because Matthew said nothing. Every time he had held her hand but not said, "My results are bad too." Every time she had apologized after a failed treatment and he had only said, don't. Such a small word, too weak, too late even then. She looked at the note that read, "Tell her before it's too late," and felt her anger not erupt, but spread slowly, cold and precise. If he had never known, she could have forgiven helplessness. If he had known late, she could have understood confusion. But he had known for 8 years. 8 years was long enough to learn a new language, change careers, pay off nearly an entire debt, raise a child into the 3rd grade if that child had ever arrived. 8 years was too long for silence to still be called not knowing how to speak. 8 years turned cowardice into a choice. The next morning, the confrontation in the kitchen lasted longer than Claire had ever imagined she could endure. Matthew read the paper, but she realized he wasn't really reading it. He had read it many times in the past. He was only seeing it in her hands for the first time. "I was going to tell you," he said after the first few exchanges, as if going to could soften the outcome. Claire stood by the sink, arms crossed over her chest to keep herself from trembling. When he was silent, when Matthew, after the time I said I hated my body, after I couldn't go into the nursery for 3 months, after I cried because your mother said maybe I was working too much, after I sat in the car outside Target, because I saw a tiny pair of baby socks in a stranger's shopping bag. What day were you planning to tell me? He looked at her with red eyes. I don't know. Not knowing isn't an answer. It's where you hide. He flinched slightly as if struck, but he didn't argue. She went on, her voice growing calmer, and the calm made her feel like a stranger to herself. You let me become the one carrying the guilt, because that guilt fit your image better. People understand a woman grieving because she can't have a child, but you couldn't bear being the man who couldn't give his wife the future he promised. Matthew placed his hand on the table. I know I was wrong. No, you know you were found out. This time he looked up. Do you think I wasn't in pain? I think you used your pain to justify abandoning me and mine. He stepped back. I didn't abandon you. Claire let out a laugh with no joy in it. You slept in the same bed with me, while I hated myself for something you knew wasn't entirely my fault. If that wasn't abandonment, then what was it? Matthew said nothing. Outside the window, rain fell evenly, calmly, unaware that in the kitchen 2 people were peeling back 8 years of pain with their bare hands. After a long time, he said, I was ashamed. Claire nodded. I know, and I became the place where you stored your shame. When Matthew handed over the key to the locked office, Claire thought she had no strength left for another secret. But the room did not contain a single secret. It contained his system, his way of coping with life. Preserving instead of sharing, writing letters instead of speaking, keeping memory alive instead of living with the person still there. The light in the room was dim because the curtains were always half drawn. The air smelled of old paper, wood, a little dust, and cedar from the storage boxes. On the wall, photographs of them had been arranged in an order that wasn't quite chronological, as if Matthew had tried to create a cleaner timeline than the real one. In the corner of the desk was a metal box holding negative pregnancy tests wrapped in tissue paper, something that made Claire almost step back, both moved and horrified. He had kept even the evidence of failures she thought she had thrown away. On the shelf were parenting books never opened, a copy of What to Expect, bookmarked at week 6, several anniversary cards never sent from years when they had barely spoken. In the desk drawer, Claire found a stack of letters. Not 1 or 2, dozens, some short, some long, some written and crossed out, one containing only a single sentence. Today you didn't look at me when I came home, and I know I deserved it. Another. I heard you tell Marjorie on the phone that you don't know if you love me anymore. I don't blame you. I just don't know how to become someone you could love again. Another written after the day she asked for a divorce. I said if that's what you need because I didn't know what else to do except not stop you. But the truth is I wanted to get on my knees and beg you not to go. I didn't because I was afraid that begging would be another burden placed on your shoulders. Claire read that and set it down, her hand shaking. She hated him for not saying it, hated him because if he had said even a small part of these things years ago, maybe she would not have been so alone. Hated herself too, because some part of her softened in front of words that arrived too late. Matthew stood in the doorway like a child caught, hiding something broken under the bed. I wrote because I couldn't speak, he said. Claire turned back. Writing wasn't the problem. Not giving them to me was the problem. He nodded. I know, you know a lot of things, Matthew. You just don't do anything with them. That sentence made the room so quiet she could hear the rain on the roof. The night they talked in the living room was not a healing scene. It was an excavation. Every sentence dug up something that had been decomposing underground for years, still recognizable in shape, but no longer whole. Matthew said that after receiving his results, he had driven to the Willamette River, sat in the car until evening, and not come home because he didn't know how to walk through the door with that paper. I thought if I gave it to you, you would look at me differently, he said. Claire sat at the other end of the sofa, hands around a cup of tea gone cold. I looked at you differently because you didn't give it to me. He nodded. I know that now. No, you know it too late. He closed his eyes. Yes, that admission should have softened her, but it only left her anger with nowhere to hold on. When someone begins taking responsibility after everything has already died, it does not always bring justice. Sometimes it only takes away the injured person's right to remain angry in a simple way. Claire told him about the times she lied to coworkers and said they didn't want children because they were focused on their careers. About the time she locked the bathroom door and pressed her nails into her palms until she drew blood after receiving the fourth baby shower invitation in 1 month. About sitting in the empty room at the end of the hall, imagining the sound of a baby crying and feeling like she was going mad. Matthew bowed his head, hands clasped tightly, occasionally saying, "I'm sorry," but less and less as the night went on, as if he finally understood that repeating an apology too often would become another way of asking her to relieve his pain. He told her that he had gone into that room too while she was at work, hung the mobile again, then taken it down because he couldn't bear it, that he had once bought a newborn shirt after the 6-week pregnancy, then hidden it in a box after everything ended, that he sometimes dreamed of a little girl with dark hair running through the yard, even though they had never known the sex. Claire listened and felt pain take a new direction. She had thought she was the only one left behind, with an imaginary child. It turned out Matthew had one too, but he had raised that child behind a locked door, never letting her know, leaving her to believe she was infertile, alone, and too weak because she still grieved something that had never become a person. In the middle of the night, the conversation shifted toward their marriage after the loss. Claire said, "You turned this house into a place where everything had to be quiet, because if it was quiet, you didn't have to look." Matthew answered very softly, "I thought quiet was safe. Quiet isn't safe when I'm drowning." He looked at her. "I didn't know you were drowning that deeply." Claire almost laughed. "I told you in every way except the way you were willing to hear." He was silent. She continued, "I bought therapy books. I left support group brochures on the table. I asked if you wanted to come with me. You said, if you think we need to. I told you I felt us drifting apart. You said work was stressful. I cried in the car. You cleaned the garage. I was right there, Matthew. I wasn't underwater. I was drowning in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the clinic, right next to you." This time Matthew cried. Not loudly, but the tears came quickly, and he turned his face away as if ashamed. Claire looked at him, and her heart did the stupidest thing. It wanted to go to him. She didn't. Some part of her understood that compassion was not an obligation to return. Too many women had confused those two things and called it mature love. She had spent too many years living around Matthew's unspoken feelings. She did not want to keep living around his feelings now that he had finally spoken them. But after that night, the house changed. The days that followed were no longer just two divorced people avoiding each other through a laundry schedule. Something softer moved between them, and the softness was frightening because it resembled hope. Matthew began asking before he did things. "Is it okay if I clear some shared things from the garage? Would it bother you if I fix the back door handle today? Can I bring out the old photo boxes for you to see which ones you want?" Those questions were kind. And because they were kind, they were dangerous. Claire realized she had begun to wait for them. She began hearing his car in the driveway without immediately tensing. One evening, the power went out, and they lit candles in the kitchen. Matthew opened a cabinet, found an old box of pasta, and said, "We survived 15 years of marriage and still never learned to buy enough batteries." Claire laughed. He looked at her like someone seeing light in a house he thought had been abandoned. She stopped laughing immediately. He fell silent too. The moment dropped between them, beautiful and cruel, because they both knew how easily it could be misunderstood. Matthew warmed soup on the gas stove. Claire sliced bread. They ate by candlelight, talking about small things, the maple tree, the new neighbor's dog that barked too much, the realtor saying they should repaint the living room a warmer neutral. No one mentioned divorce. No one mentioned Dr. Hull. That night, before sleeping on the sofa bed, Claire hated herself for having felt comfortable. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Matthew moving around in the main bedroom, and thought, this is how people get pulled back. Not through grand begging, through soup in a storm, an old joke, a blanket over the shoulders, a person finally saying the things you waited too long to hear. The next morning, Matthew left a new bag of coffee on the counter, the kind she liked from the little shop near her office. No note. None needed. Claire picked up the coffee, put it back down, and went to work without making any. At the office, she sat in front of her computer, handling appointment schedules, insurance contracts, staff notices, but her mind kept circling back to the house. She wondered if there was a kind of love that arrived late and could still save something. Then she was angry at herself for asking. Why did the person left alone for years still have to be the one weighing the last chance? Why did Matthew's late truth have the power to make her doubt? A decision she had suffered to the edge of herself to make. At lunch, she called Marjorie, not about anything legal, but just to ask one very human question. Is it normal if I feel soft toward him? Marjorie was quiet for a moment, then said, very normal, but softness is not proof that the circumstances have changed enough. It is only proof that you have a heart. Claire sat in her car outside the office, listening to rain tap the windshield. He isn't a bad man. Many people hurt others deeply without being monsters, Marjorie said. That does not require you to stay in order to prove you are fair. That sentence became something Claire held in her mind over the following days. Fairness did not mean handing herself back to the wound, because the person who caused it had finally learned its name. The email from the realtor arrived on Thursday at 2:17 p.m. Hi Claire, just confirming Matthew asked us to pause the sale until further notice. Let me know if you're aligned on the revised plan. Claire read the line and felt all the softness in the house drain out of her like water from a tub. She didn't call Matthew right away. She printed the email, placed it in her folder, and drove home in the rain. When she stepped inside, Matthew was in the kitchen slicing apples, a scene so ordinary it made her feel sick. He looked up. You're home early. She placed the folder on the table. You asked the realtor to pause the sale. Matthew looked at the folder, then at the knife in his hand and set it down very slowly. I was going to tell you. You were going to tell me a lot of things in this life. He winced as if hurt, but she did not stop. You don't get to use that sentence anymore like a permission slip. I wasn't ready to sell. You don't get to be ready by yourself. The house isn't only yours. I know, no. You know it with your mouth. But in action, you still decide first and hope I'll fall into circumstances that make me agree. Matthew looked away. I just needed more time. We had 90 days because you said you needed time. You had a locked room for 8 years because you needed time. You kept the test results because you needed time. You wrote letters you never sent because you needed time. Matthew, your time has always been purchased with my life. The sentence made him freeze. Claire heard the faint sound of the dishwasher, the rain outside, his breathing. After a long while, he said, if we sell the house, you'll really leave. She looked at him. This was the real sentence. No more roof inspection, mortgage, staging, slow market. Just a man admitting that the house was the last rope. I already left, she said. You're only making it happen slower. Matthew turned back, eyes red. I thought if you stayed here a little longer, if I could say it. If I could fix some things, maybe you would. He didn't finish. Claire finished for him. Maybe I would remember I once loved you enough to forget how badly I hurt. He lowered his head. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? He looked at her with a desperation almost like anger. I don't know how to live in a world where you aren't at the end of the hall. The sentence entered her, painful and dangerous. And I spent years living in a world where you were at the end of the hall but not beside me. Matthew looked as if the air had left him. She spoke more slowly. You used the house to keep me. I used it to hope. Hope that doesn't tell the truth, doesn't ask me, doesn't respect my decision, is just control with a prettier name. For the first time, Matthew looked truly angry. So everything I do is wrong. If I let go, you say I didn't fight. If I hold on, you say I'm controlling. Claire looked at him, and in that moment she saw that their tragedy was no longer about a lack of love. It was about Matthew always placing himself at the center of the pain, even when apologizing for causing hers. Fighting is not keeping me in a house I'm trying to leave. Fighting would have been telling the truth while there was still time. You want points after the game is already over. He did not answer. She picked up the folder. I'm moving out before the house sells. Looking for an apartment became another humiliating stretch of exhaustion. Claire was 41, divorced, not yet fully separated financially, with a demanding work schedule. And suddenly she had to stand in small apartments that smelled of cheap new paint, listening to leasing agents talk about pet fees when she had no pet, parking spaces, shared laundry, 12-month leases. She viewed one place too far from the office. One with windows facing a brick wall, one with bass music thudding from the unit below, one with a kitchen so small she didn't know where she would put a cutting board. Each time she returned to the old house after viewing apartments, she felt weaker. The house hurt, but it was familiar. The new apartments didn't hurt, but they were cold. And people sometimes choose familiar pain, because unfamiliar cold feels more frightening. Matthew didn't ask much, but she knew he knew. A brochure for an apartment slipped from her bag onto the kitchen table. He picked it up and set it neatly back down. This one is far. I know. That neighborhood gets icy in winter. I'll drive carefully. I can check your car before you move. Your rear tires are a little worn. Matthew, he stopped. She exhaled. You don't need to turn every worry into a way to stay. He looked at her, tired and wounded. I was only talking about the tires. I know. And that's the problem. Everything can be just tires until I look back and realize I still haven't left. He set the brochure down. I don't know what to say that won't be wrong. Claire felt herself soften a little, but she did not let it show. Maybe not everything needs to be said. Some things need to be done. Let the realtor continue. Let me move. Stop fixing the things that keep me here. Packing took Claire many days because she could not do it continuously. Each box pulled up another layer of memory. In the living room, she took the wedding photo down from the mantel. Pictures showed the two of them in light rain outside a converted barn in Willamette Valley. Claire in a simple white dress, hair loose, Matthew looking at her as if nothing in the world could pull him away. She put it in a box marked storage, not trash. She was not cold enough to throw it away. In the kitchen, she divided knives, pans, dishes. Matthew said she should keep the better pots because she cooked more. She said he should keep the cast iron pan because he had always cared for it. They discussed household objects in voices so overly polite that each item seemed to contain a small battle. Who kept the large salad bowl from their first dinner parties? Who kept the wedding wine glasses from a friend they no longer spoke to? Who kept the waffle maker they had used exactly 3 times? At moments, Claire wanted to say throw it all away. But objects were not guilty. The house wasn't guilty either. The innocence of objects hurt, because it forced people to admit that not everything in the past was dirty. Matthew stood in doorways often, wanting to help. He did not step inside unless she invited him. This was progress, or only a new form of pain. One Sunday afternoon, Claire was wrapping books in newspaper when he asked, "Can I help?" She didn't look up. No, he stood there a few more seconds. "There's a lot. I know. I don't want you to have to do it alone." She stopped moving. "I've done a lot of things alone in this house. At least this time I know what I'm doing." He nodded, his face going pale, and stepped away. Claire sat on the floor among the books and cried silently, not because she wanted him gone, because she didn't know how to live with both truths, that she needed to do it herself and that some part of her still wanted him to sit beside her, wrap books, read old notes, and say goodbye together. Some desires are no longer allowed to become action. They remain inside a person like rooms with no lights on. The room that had once been the nursery was the last place she entered. After Matthew agreed to open it fully so they could clear it before listing, the door was no longer locked, but Claire still avoided. One afternoon, after a rare break in the rain, pale light falling through the window, she stepped inside with an empty cardboard box. The room was almost bare after they had moved most things out, but a few very old paint samples still clung to the wall, cream turned yellowed, silvery blue as faint as mist. The low bookshelf was still there, dust gathered along the edge. Claire wiped it with her fingers, looking at the dust on her skin. In the closet, behind an old blanket, she found a small plastic box. Inside was a pair of cream-colored baby shoes, impossibly tiny, with soft laces and soles that had never touched the ground. Claire could not breathe for a moment. She remembered the day they bought them. After the first ultrasound with a little hope, before everything ended, they had stopped at a baby store just to look. Matthew had picked up the shoes and placed them in his broad palm, smiling like a man holding the future as physical evidence. Claire had said, "Don't. It's too early." He had answered, "Maybe. But do you see how small they are? We can't not buy something this small." She had laughed and finally agreed. They brought them home and placed them in the nursery closet. 6 weeks later, she couldn't find them. She thought she had thrown them out in her grief, or that Matthew had put them away because she couldn't bear them. But they had been there all along, waiting like a question no one had answered. Matthew appeared in the doorway. Maybe he heard the box fall softly. When he saw the shoes in her hands, his face changed completely. No more man trying to stay calm. No more repairman. Only someone dragged back to the most painful moment. "I didn't know they were still there," he said. Claire looked at him. "You knew." He didn't argue. He stepped in but stopped a few feet away. "I put them away after that day. I thought if you saw them, I would break." He closed his eyes. "Yes, I had already broken Matthew. You just hid one of the pieces and called it protection." He cried then, not loudly, tears falling before he could turn away. Claire cried too, not to return, not to forgive completely. They cried for the shoes, for the child with no name, for the 2 younger people who had bought them with a faith almost insulting in its innocence. Claire held the box to her chest, then set it down on the floor between them. "I thought I had ruined everything," Matthew said, his voice breaking. "I know, and I let you think that. That is what I can't come back from." He covered his mouth with his hand, as if afraid the sound of his sobs would bother her. "So this is the real goodbye?" She looked at him through tears. Yes, the one at the lawyer's office was just the easier part to sign. Their second goodbye happened in the kitchen on a rainy evening. The house was full of cardboard boxes. On the living room wall, the place where the wedding photo had stood, was now only a clean rectangle of dustless space. The rule sheet had been taken down from the refrigerator. Claire's blue mug was wrapped in newspaper inside a box. Matthew did not make coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, his wedding ring removed and lying in front of him. Claire placed her house key beside it. No lawyers, no legal language, no dissolved. Just two people who had passed through too many forms of ending and still needed one final conversation for the soul to catch up with the paperwork. Matthew looked at the ring, then said, "I love you. I think I always loved you." Claire heard the sentence and did not feel lighter. It was the thing she had waited years to hear. But now it felt like a letter delivered to a house already sold. "I know," she said, "but you loved me in silence for so long that I had to learn how to live without hearing it." He bowed his head. "I thought if I didn't speak the pain, it would hurt you less." "No, you made the pain have no witness." He nodded, tears falling onto his hands. "I don't want you to go. I know. I don't know who I am if you're not in this house." Claire looked at him, and for the first time she did not feel responsible for fixing that sentence. "You'll have to find out, the same way I had to find out who I was while living with you and still being lonely." He inhaled like he had been stabbed. "Is there anything I can do now?" Claire was quiet for a moment. It was the cruelest question because it came too late, but was not meaningless. "Yes," she said. "Let me leave without turning your pain into a reason for me to stay." Matthew nodded. Not immediately, not easily, but he nodded, and that was the clearest act of love he had managed in years. Sadly, it was the act of not keeping her. They sat in silence for a long time. Rain slid down the kitchen window. The heater came on, then shut off. The house breathed around them with its old sound. At last, Claire stood. Matthew stood too, but he did not follow. She picked up her bag and put on her coat. At the front door, she paused for 1 second, remembering the day he had carried her across the threshold and said the house needed to know they were a team. Now she stepped across it alone. She did not turn back until she was already on the porch. Matthew stood inside under the yellow hallway light, smaller, older, no longer the one holding the door. She closed it. The sound was not loud. It was not like the movies, but Claire knew some small sounds are enough to divide a life into before and after. The house went on the market 3 weeks later. The realtor added a few staged plants, changed the kitchen towels to white, suggested repainting the living room in a warmer neutral. Strangers walked through every room, opened cupboards, asked about the heating system, the age of the roof, the schools, the neighbors. One young couple stood in the room that had once been the nursery and said it would make a great office or second baby room. Claire heard them from the hallway and had to turn away, not because she was angry at them, because that room could still become a place where another child slept. Life is always cruel in the way it continues offering hope to other people in the exact place where yours died. Matthew was also present at the first open house, but he kept his distance. Under the maple in the yard, he stood beside Claire in silence. Most of the leaves had fallen, the branches bare against the gray sky. "It got big," he said. Claire looked at the tree. "Yes, I used to think." He stopped. She knew what he meant. Under its shade, children, summer afternoons, another life. "Me too," she said. Nothing more. After the open house, when the realtor locked up, Matthew went into the empty room at the end of the hall. Claire stood in the doorway and watched him bend down to take the box with the baby shoes from the low shelf, where they had temporarily placed. He held it for a long time, then put it into his own moving box. He did not ask whether she wanted to keep it. He did not use it to pull another conversation back open. He did not turn the shoes into a plea. For the first time, he held a piece of pain without asking her to carry it too. Claire saw it, and it hurt in a quieter way. When they signed the sale documents, the closing office was bright white and smelled of printer ink. The woman handling the file spoke quickly about escrow, transfer, buyer contingencies, closing costs, keys, utility shut-off. Claire read every line before signing. She had signed many things in her marriage because she believed they were a team. Now she read because she understood that love was not a substitute for comprehension. Matthew sat beside her, not rushing her. He read too. On the final page, his pen stopped before the name Bennett. Then he signed. Claire looked at the shape of his handwriting and remembered wedding vows, the note on the soup, unsent letters, the note that said, "Tell her before it's too late." A whole life can exist inside a kind of handwriting and still not be spoken in time. A few days before handing over the house, they met there one last time. No sofa, no dining table, no bookshelves. Their footsteps sounded strange on the hardwood floor. The kitchen looked larger and colder without anything in it. Pale marks on the walls showed where photos had once hung. The room that had been the nursery was completely empty. Door open, gray afternoon light falling inside. Claire walked through each room without touching anything. Matthew stood in the living room, holding the envelope of keys. "I'm sorry," he said. Claire turned. He continued, slowly and with effort. "Not the kind of sorry that asks you to make me feel better. I'm sorry I let you live inside a false story about yourself. I'm sorry I kept the truth to protect my own shame and called it protecting you. I'm sorry I loved you without letting you hear it." Claire looked at him. This was the apology she had once needed so badly that if it had come 8 years earlier, she might have collapsed into his chest. Now it stood before her like a train, arriving after the station had been demolished. "Thank you," she said. 2 words too small for all of it. But she had no other words that were both true and did not promise anything. He nodded, as if understanding that was all he was going to receive. When they stepped outside, Matthew locked the door for the last time. He placed the key inside the envelope for the realtor. Claire looked at the maple tree. Wind made its branches touch, dry and light. Another family would hang Christmas lights on this porch. Someone else would open the kitchen door in the morning. Maybe someday a child would run across the yard and climb the maple when it was old enough. The house would not remember them the way they remembered. Houses are very good at betraying the people who leave by being ready to hold someone new. Claire's new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a small building in East Portland. No yard, no maple, no garage where a man could stand on the phone and say, "She's still here." The living room window looked out over a parking lot, a few bare trees, and a street lamp that always flickered before fully turning on. On moving day, it rained lightly. A coworker helped her carry up a few boxes, then left before dark. Claire stood in the middle of the living room full of cartons, listening to rain tap the small window, cars passing on the street, the neighbor upstairs dragging a chair. No smell of Matthew's coffee, no old heater groaning in the wall, no footsteps at the end of the hall. She had thought the absence of those things would make her lighter. But absence has weight too. It sat down in the room with her. She opened a box, pulled out a temporary mug, made tea with the electric kettle she had just bought, then sat on the floor because the sofa had not been assembled. Her phone lit up at 6:18. A text from Matthew. "I'm sorry I made silence feel like love." Claire read it. Once, twice, she placed the phone face down, then turned it over and read it again. Tears fell slowly, not violently, not with release. She did not answer, not because she had nothing left to say, because some replies only pull one more thread between two people who have spent too long cutting themselves free. Maybe one day she would write, "I know." Maybe she never would. That night she slept on a mattress on the floor, between the smell of cardboard dust and new fabric. She woke several times, unsure where she was. Once at 3 in the morning, she thought she heard Matthew cough at the end of the hall. There was no hall, no Matthew, only the small refrigerator in the apartment humming, then going quiet. In the weeks that followed, Claire went on living in a very uncinematic way. She went to work, bought groceries for one, forgot to buy salt, assembled a bookshelf backward, and then fixed it herself, changed her mailing address, signed papers separating insurance, sat in her car, and cried after seeing a car that looked like Matthew's in the grocery store parking lot. Some days she felt strong because she did not have to ask anyone what they wanted for dinner. Some days she stood in her narrow kitchen holding an onion, not knowing what to cook, because for 15 years she had thought of dinner through the habits of two people. Some nights she opened a box and found the wool scarf they had shared on a trip to Cannon Beach, and had to close the box immediately. Marjorie had once said freedom did not always feel like freedom at first. Sometimes it felt like the loss of structure. Claire understood that in her bones. She did not hate Matthew. That was the hardest part to say if anyone asked. Hatred would have been easier. Hatred had a clear energy, but she carried something more complicated. Old love, anger, pity, exhaustion, late gratitude, and a boundary that no longer allowed her to return just because he had finally learned how to cry in the right place. Matthew was not a monster. He was a man who had hurt her with silence, with shame, with delay, with unprocessed grief, with a love not mature enough to become truth in time. That did not make the wound smaller. It only made the story impossible to tell in a single sentence. 1 month after moving out, Claire received a forwarded envelope from the old house. Inside was a copy of the final closing papers, and a small photograph Matthew had sent without a note. The photograph showed the maple tree in the yard on the last morning before the handover, its bare branches against a gray sky. On the back, there was only one line: "It grew anyway." Claire sat at her small kitchen table and stared at that sentence for a long time. It had grown even though no child had climbed, even though they had never sat beneath its shade, even though the old promise had not come true. The tree healed nothing. It simply continued. Maybe that was the cruelest and truest thing Matthew had ever sent her. Claire placed the photo in a drawer. Not with the divorce papers, not with keepsakes. Just an ordinary drawer. She did not want to make a shrine out of every wound, but she also did not want to pretend it had not once been her life. Portland's winter stretched on, damp and gray. Claire's apartment slowly gained a few things that were hers. A small blue rug, 2 plants by the window, the bookshelf reassembled properly, the pale blue mug sitting on the kitchen counter. Once she accidentally made enough coffee for 2, and stood staring at the extra coffee in the pot. She poured it out, cried a little, and went to work. Once she heard children laughing in the hallway, probably the neighbor's kids, and had to close her bedroom door to breathe. Once she passed a children's store and saw a tiny pair of cream-colored shoes in the display window, and her stomach clenched as if struck. Survival is not the absence of being stabbed by small things. Survival is being stabbed and still not returning to the place where you bled too long just because it is familiar. Matthew occasionally sent practical emails about tax paperwork, the repair reimbursement, mail that still arrived for her. He did not call, did not stop by, did not use his mother's health, her tires, a file, the maple tree, or the baby's shoes to create a reason to meet. Maybe he was finally learning to love by not pulling. Claire did not know. She no longer made his growth her assignment. One evening at the end of January, she received an email from him with only a scanned insurance document attached. At the bottom, he wrote, "I hope the apartment is warm enough." Claire looked at the sentence and smiled very sadly. Still Matthew, still loving through things that could be checked. Temperature, tires, paperwork. But this time, he added nothing else. "No, I miss you. No, can I come fix something?" No hook. Claire replied, "It's warm enough." 2 sentences. Another kind of civility. Not an open door, just a hallway that no longer needed to be locked. In March, the buyers moved into the old house. Claire knew because the realtor sent a final notification, and because an old neighbor texted a photo of the maple with a few strings of lights newly wrapped around the trunk. "The house has new people now," she wrote without malice. Claire looked at the photo. On the porch was a small red child's bicycle. She didn't know whose it was. Maybe the family had a child. Maybe it was only a visiting niece or nephew. But seeing that bicycle in front of the house that had once held her empty room gave Claire a quiet, deep ache, no longer violent, but not gone. She turned off her phone and sat beside the apartment window, watching rain fall into the parking lot. She no longer owned the house. No key, no name on the mortgage, no practical reason left to be pulled back. But some places, once they have been your future, still know the way into your dreams even after someone else paints the wall. That night, Claire dreamed of the nursery. In the dream, it was not empty, but there was no child either. Only the wooden mobile turning gently, tiny birds circling beneath the ceiling. Not rising, not falling, only repeating a very beautiful and very hopeless orb. She woke before dawn. The apartment bedroom cold, street lamp light slipping through the curtain in a yellow stripe across the wall. She lay still, not crying. Some dreams do not need tears because they are already made of them. She got up and made coffee for one, with less sugar than before. Holding the pale blue mug, she thought of the morning after the divorce, Matthew pouring coffee, the ring on his hand, the sentence, "I'm not trying to remember." Now no one remembered for her in the kitchen. That was both sad and necessary. She took the first sip. The coffee was slightly bitter. She did not add sugar, not to prove anything, only because she wanted to know its true taste. They had signed the divorce papers months before they truly let go. First ending belonged to the court, with signatures, files, notices, and clean words like dissolved. The second ending belonged to the house, with coffee cups, a wedding ring, a call in the garage, hidden fertility records, a locked room full of unsent letters, baby shoes, a maple tree, and a door that closed without drama. There was no victory, no clear justice. Matthew was not punished in a way that would satisfy an audience. Claire did not walk out of the marriage with her heart intact, or some radiant new self. She walked out only with the truth, and truth that arrives late is a cold thing. It does not return the years. It does not place a child in the empty room. It does not turn unsent letters into conversations that might once have saved them. It only says, "This happened." The pain had a real cause. Her loneliness was not imagined. And sometimes that is all a survivor receives. Claire went on living, but she did not return to who she had been. Some part of her stayed behind in that house outside Portland, in the nursery that never became a nursery, beside the baby shoes that never touched the ground, beside the letters that did not reach her in time. That part did not die completely. It simply no longer came with her whole. It remained like a room no longer belonging to anyone. A room the new owners might paint another color, place a desk inside, hang pictures on the wall, and call by an ordinary name. While beneath the paint, somewhere very deep, there was still the sound of a marriage that ended twice. And on rainy mornings, when Claire stood alone in her small kitchen with no one at the end of the hall, no one making her coffee exactly right, no one using silence as love anymore, she understood that safety did not always feel warm. Sometimes it was only a colder, quieter room, where no one kept you there with the things they never said.